Hi, this is Angela from Warped Weft with a video on why I don't use expensive art materials. In this video, there are images of artwork that I've created. Some of these were created by following video tutorials. Where a tutorial has been followed, it's acknowledged and credit is given to the creator of the tutorial. Links to the tutorials are given below. Number 1, I can't afford them. Is this my primary reason? In the beginning, yes, but knowing now what I didn't know when I was starting out, it's not the sole reason. They're still out of my price range, but there are a whole host of reasons why I probably wouldn't buy them even if I could afford them. One very valid reason to use top-of-the-range colours is that some pigments are very expensive. Cheaper paints use a hue instead, which is an approximation of the pigment made with a combination of other cheaper pigments. In some cases, these expensive pigments are toxic, such as cadmium-based colours, and are banned in some countries, so there's no point in buying them anyway. That's fair enough, but it still doesn't mean that we can afford them. Top-of-the-range or so-called professional materials have more pigment in them. I don't doubt this, but the difference in some cases is minimal. As a beginner, it was very easy for me to misjudge the amounts of colours when I was mixing. Using paints with lower levels of pigments were easier to manage in that respect. I still do overcook it on occasions, especially if it's a new brand, new colour, or one that I haven't used for a while. Professional colours have less fillers. Well, sometimes a lack of filler can be an issue. I have 1 or 2 top-range oil colours that I was given as gifts. Oil and pigment separation in those pure paints is a real problem, and if ever I had the money to buy them, I certainly wouldn't be buying those particular brands. The next reason commonly given is longevity, or in other words, how the colour and or the surface behaves over time. For most of us, that isn't an issue. Well, I'm not, and I never will be the next Picasso. I'm not a professional artist. I don't expect to hang anything in a gallery, and I paint for my own pleasure, not for what sells. If you need to follow an art tutorial on YouTube, clearly you aren't a professional artist either. So why would we be worried about longevity or gallery and or buyer expectations as far as materials go? The next common argument is that you won't get good results from cheap materials. That's not necessarily true. You just need to adapt your style to using them. YouTube is full of tutorials spruiking expensive art materials and telling you that you won't achieve good results if you don't use these costly items. Many are sponsored by suppliers themselves, or the tutor's been given freebies to use, or even thinks that the use of top-of-the-range materials somehow gives them more credibility. So they'll tell you you won't get good results if you don't use these materials. If you need tutorials, by definition, you're still learning, and in all probability, you won't achieve the same standard of artwork as the tutor, no matter what materials you use when following the tutorials. There's an old saying, a bad workman always blames his tools. Next up are some arguments against using the most expensive art materials. Fear of messing up with expensive art materials can paralyze your creativity. This is a very real issue. How many of us have found ways to procrastinate and not put brush nor pencil to paper or canvas, and when we do eventually start creating, we find we're too stressed about messing up, so we either don't enjoy what we're doing, or we do mess it up because we're stressed. Using inexpensive art materials takes a lot of those worries away. So this next one's a little bit controversial, but I don't, and I never have, bought into the whole branding one-upmanship game. Branding and price don't necessarily mean quality, just fat profits. It's literally a vanity tax as far as I'm concerned. I'm old enough and ugly enough to know that you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, and there's other things way more important in life than carrying a Louis Vuitton handbag and worrying about what other people think. Rules stifle creativity. Be wary of anyone telling you that your artwork isn't authentic if you don't do it the way they say you must do it, pay the megabucks to learn the right way to do it, and that you must use overpriced materials they sell and make a profit from. Experimentation never hurt anyone, and there's no authentic way to do anything in the art world, nor the craft world for that matter. Don't fall into the bogus qualification trap. It's just a bottomless pit that will empty your bank account without improving your artwork or your soul. These people prey on shopaholics. Now, there are a couple of rules that spring to mind that you do need to follow because they'll make life miserable for you if you don't. These include the fat over lean rule in oil painting because there's a good chance of your painting will crack as it dries if you don't follow that rule. And secondly, never try and paint acrylic over an oil painting. The acrylic just won't stick. Adapt your style to your financial means and enjoy your art more. There are certain cheaper brands of paint that suit my style and my colour selection preference that I wouldn't change even if I could afford top of the range products. There's certain colours and textures of oil paint that I really like. A point in question is this sap green. It's Winton from Winsor Newton. It's transparent and soft and it's perfect for glazing. Randy Georgian used to make one almost the same, but the one they have now is not transparent, so I've stopped using it. Winton is a mid-range paint. It's made in France. It used to be cheap in the UK, but there was some agreement that they couldn't sell it outside the EU, and consequently we pay more than double the price for it in Australia. Georgian Rowney is also a mid-range paint. It's from the UK, and the company is based in Bracknell, coincidentally the town I grew up in. Here are a couple of cheaper and mid-range paints that I have in my paint box. The one on the left is Montmartre. It's a local brand. I'm not sure if you can get it overseas. I don't mind using burnt umber, black, white, that kind of thing with this, but some of the colours seem to be a little bit flat, so I don't use all of them. The other two are white. My choice of white is based on the consistency I need for my painting. I like the consistency of Winton mixing white, but I use a lot of it and it gets expensive. So I'm looking for a cheaper alternative. The few I've tried have been too stiff. The one on the right is Jackson's, and yes, that is too stiff for most of my needs, but it is good when I need to put a thick layer of paint on. The one in the middle is Reeves. That one is a cheaper alternative. It's okay, maybe a little bit too soft, but it's excellent for base covering a large area such as sky. This is the gesso that I'm using at the moment. It's Eraldo di Paola. It's a Riot, which is an art supply in Australia, home brand. I love it. It's just the right consistency for me and is as cheap as making it myself if I can get it when it's on sale. Moving on to watercolour, I don't use expensive watercolour paper. I have control issues with the more expensive watercolour paper, and being a control freak in my painting, it just doesn't suit me. It suits some people's style, and that's what they like about it, but it's not for me. This is my favourite watercolour paper at the moment. It's Ohuhu, and it was bought from Amazon. It's not really cheap, no 300 GSM watercolour paper is, but it's a whole lot cheaper than Arch is. It does come in a block, which some people don't like, but I'm fine with it. It came in a double pack. Once I've used that double pack, I will probably buy it again. I do have a longer video on this paper. The link is below if you're interested. This is Bourne brand paper. It's available from Officeworks in New South Wales, Australia. It's another cheaper watercolour paper. It's a bit more absorbent than Ohuhu, but unfortunately tears easily when removing masking tape, as you can see here on the right hand side where I accidentally tore the paper while I was removing the tape. Eraldo di Paolo watercolour pad. It's 100% cotton. Eraldo di Paolo is Riot's home brand. I've mentioned that before. It's very much like Ohuhu. I took a chance and I bought some A3 pads in a sale, so I guess I got lucky. Things I make myself. Not only can it be cheaper, but I can get the consistency I'm looking for. Texture paste is one example. I've also been known to reuse a stretcher from an unloved painting. Of which canvases are expensive, and storage of canvas can be a problem. I take fully dried canvases off the stretcher. The ones I really like I mount on MDF board. The ones I don't like, my unloved ones, I hang up in bunches on trouser hangers like this. The empty stretchers can be reused if you're prepared to stretch your own canvas. You can also paint on surfaces other than stretched canvas. There's tons of videos on YouTube on ways of preparing surfaces, so I'm not going to go into details on that subject here. Now we come to the bit where I'm actually going to advocate the use of reasonable quality materials, and that's in the use of pastel pencils and paper. You need to use a paper that's got tooth and that isn't so soft that the pencils are going to crush that tooth. I use Fabriano Ingres paper. It's probably on the higher side of mid-range, but it doesn't crush as badly as some pastel papers. There are a couple of cheap papers that don't crush, but the texture's more shiny and knobbly rather than toothy, and I find the chalky pastel doesn't grip properly. I've also tried a number of pastel pencils, cheap and expensive, and I find that they're all too hard, which I find also crushes the paper. I found pastel pencils are just right. Apart from a couple of the greens, white and cream, which get used quite a lot, the rest last a very long time, so it's worth investing in a set and just replacing those few colours as needed. I've had mine for about 10 years now. I have replaced, I think it's only the white and the cream. The white I think I've replaced a couple of times. I live in Australia, and unfortunately we seem to pay more for art materials than many other countries, for no good reason that anyone has ever been able to explain to me. Finding cheaper ways of doing things has become a necessity in the current economic climate, even if that means paying half the price for the same product from a supplier in London and having it air-mailed out, which for some reason is cheaper and takes not much longer than local suppliers can ship it across the same city. I'm not the only one who's figured this out either. I'll just let that bit of information I just fired across the bows sink in for a moment. If you like this video, please consider hitting the like button and also subscribing to my channel. I don't post often, only when I have something interesting that might be useful to someone sometime.